me again, everyone. We are last but not least. Lisa had asked me if I wanted to moderate this session, and I have to tell you, I jumped at the opportunity. Global travel is so unique, and as I mentioned when I was on stage earlier, I worked in national, multinational, global operations, and years ago when I started being introduced to global operations, what I learned very quickly was the world is very different. So we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. So I jumped at this opportunity because we represent 3 very different regions around the globe that have very different perspectives. So if I can give any advice to any new travel manager out there that's onboarding a global account, keep an open mind and understand that there are uniquenesses around the globe. And the sooner, take my lessons learned, the sooner you realize that, the quicker that you can onboard a new program. So with that said, I do know that we are under the wire with time, and I want to make sure I give our panelists the time to be able to answer the question, and I'm honored to be their moderator. And so I'm going to start with question 1, and as you answer the question, if you don't mind explaining the regions that you are representing. I know Lisa touched on it, but if you can get into a little bit more detail, that would be great. So Joanne, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come this way, if that's okay. So coming into the new norm, okay, online adoption was at its peak in some markets. During COVID, it rolled back. What is your online adoption, and how has it changed?
So I come from Asia and represent Asia. So we're talking about Asia region stretches, from South Korea all the way down to Indonesia. So where I come from, to begin with, even pre-COVID, online adoption rate has never been very high. So it needs a lot of work to get travelers or get people involved to use an online booking tool in our region. So all in all, you need strong mandate, you need a lot of education to push people to use online. So to answer that, I think in general, the region prefers touch service or high touch service even more so today. And for that reason, the tool is always left untouched because agents are more preferred. And there's also a lot of work involved where travelers would expect us to provide them full information, requirements, so they would always come back to us for all those checks and all those requirements before they even consider booking, a trip. So that's the reason why the adoption rate in my region is pretty low. And even driving a lot of education, a lot of push to use the tool, it has to be consistent. Reaching 50%, it's an excellent result. That is with a heavy push and constant reminder and training and telling them the objectives and the benefits of using the tool. So that has to be ongoing in order to drive a high adoption rate. In general, we just heard from one client in the room to say that in Asia, they've got Concur for more than a year, and after a year, it's still 0% adoption rate. So that's exactly where I'm coming from. And she understands why it is, and she said, "I'll keep it this way." We put in a lot of work, but it's still 0. Then again, I think it's a lot to do with the culture.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here, Pam and Lisa. And I represent Latin America, more specifically Brazil and Mexico, which are the markets that we cover with Brickell Travel on the One Global. And the situation in Brazil is very different than what you're explaining, Johan, in Asia, because what we noticed really is that right after the countries start to lift the restrictions because of COVID, the clients were very quick to get back to the online booking tools. We have pretty good online adoption in both markets, more in Brazil than in Mexico, but also Mexico, the clients that had online booking tools and had previously high adoption rates once the restrictions were lifted, they were very quick to get back to it. So actually, our adoption rate today is higher than pre-pandemic. So we're happy with that.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Andreas. I'm German, working in Switzerland, and I'm representing EMEA. The topic of this is changing traveler behaviors, right? But allow me one personal comment to this before I answering this question. So arriving 2.5 days before here, all my global colleagues, they make a lot of fun of me because I was just wearing the one global shirt 2.5 days. Why? Because my luggage is still in Frankfurt. They have not found it. And I have done some power shopping this morning, socks, jeans, shirt, T-shirt, underwear. Don't worry, I don't show you. But lesson learned, next time I take, regardless of the weight, I take everything on board. So believe me, that's my personal lesson learned. But coming back to the question in regards to the online booking tools. So Switzerland is a very small market. And the challenge we have is we have 3 languages, right? I mean, it's German part, the Italian part, it's Italian, and the French part. And of course, some people speak English as well. And to introduce an online booking tool, especially in the Geneva region, so that means in the French part, you need to have a tool which covers all these language capabilities, right? It starts with the tool itself. On the other side, we have adoption rates from 0 to 80–90%. 80–90%, we just achieved this when the company makes it mandatory. Otherwise, it's somewhere in the middle between 40–45% in average the usage. During COVID, it was more or less 0. And we had the feeling that the travelers, they had to learn again how to use these tools because everybody forgot how to book online, even if this is quite simple. But because of all the restrictions and the limitations, maybe the travelers, they've been even, they had some, how to say this in English, some fear to use it, right? So they don't feel very safe by using it. But this comes back now. And step by step, we are achieving the levels pre-corona as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the conversation. And you're laughing and you're smiling about it, so that is fantastic.
I'm so happy now.
All right, so Mark, I'm going to start with you. So how has traveler bookings behavior changed in your market? So for example, are you seeing differences like with advanced purchases, people who are allowed to travel, have client policy changed? I know that's very broad. If you can talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. So we've seen that it has been very dynamic. There are changes, that are occurring like every month in terms of patterns. Because there's a reality, especially with Brazil, the cost of airfare has, increased significantly. We've seen that here in the US, generally speaking, the cost of the airfare is going down this year compared to last year and also to 2019 a little bit. In Brazil, it's going up. So while here in the US, I think from May to June was the last indicator I saw, it went down 6%. In Brazil, it went up 13%. So what we saw in end of fiscal year, a lot of companies start to restrict the budgets and put a lot of controls for people, to prevent them to book travel or to be more restrictive with more approval flows or different approval flows, assigning approval to more high-level individuals within the organizations. But then we start to saw that people need to travel to conduct their business. So they were really waiting to book their trips. And what happened was that they start to book last minute and cost went up. So this is one of the things that I noticed, that people were really waiting to very, very last minute. I think they were traveling only was, strictly urgent and necessary. But at the end of the day, they were then paying more for those tickets. So now we see people scrambling back to see how they can address the situation, right? And perhaps open up a little bit more. It's a new fiscal year too, so definitely that helps a lot of the clients. But this is one of the patterns that like got our attention a lot, and from the feedback that we got during the business reviews with our clients as well.
Great, thank you. And Joanne, how about you?
Even with airlines increasing their capacity, we still see that travelers it's difficult for travelers to actually get on some certain flights to certain destination. And for that reason, where I come from, travelers are booking way in advance. So we're talking about 60, 90 days or more if the policy allows. So they're doing that to secure hopefully the best fare and to be able to get on the flight that they need to go. And airlines are, coming out with different fare types with continuous pricing and things like that. So travelers are very careful of their budget. And to manage that, they'll book early on secure the best rate and try to stick to it, although we know that it's quite difficult for many corporates to do that, to book 90 days in advance and then stick to the itinerary and not change. But then again, that's the behavior that we're facing. They just want to make sure that they are secure, they've got a seat, they are able to fly, and that's all that matters. And of course, managing the costs as well. Booking last minute, it can be quite disappointing for them because they won't get what they want, especially if they're doing long hauls and their policy allows business class. It's limited seats on business, so they will have to book very early to get, rather than to downgrade to economy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Andreas?
So what we see as well is the trend to book as much as possible in advance. Just because the seats are limited, right? This is what you said as well. So, especially between Europe and Asia, there is not one single seat available. And if you yourself flying, you will see that all seats, regardless if this is economy, premium economy, or business class, the flights are all full, right? So. The old advice to book as long as possible in advance is still correct on one side, but on the other side, we see as well with, you mentioned the contingent pricing, for example. We don't know at what time, if we have agreements in place with customers for, booking the best available rate, for example, when is the time to book the best available rate? That's really becoming a big issue for us right now. Because if you book 3 months, 6 months in advance and you think, okay, I've secured the place, I've booked the best price, and then somebody else in your company, they book it just 2 weeks ago, before the flight, and it's 1,000 Swiss francs or $1,000 cheaper, then how do you explain this? How do you explain this internally, to your colleagues in the company, and how can we just justify why is it now cheaper? And this is getting really an issue right now, and therefore our advice is just to book as possible, as far ahead as possible, just to secure the seat, right? And then we have software in place checking until the very last moment if something changed and if a rebooking would make sense and if possible. So then you cover both actually. So you have the seat, if nothing changed, okay, you are on the flight, but if something changed, you can be sure that you get a cheaper flight sooner to the departure date. Mm-hmm. But it's getting more and more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's some big changes for sure. So let's switch gears a little bit. Based on those changes, what are travel managers doing in your market in that changing environment to try to manage that? Andreas, why don't we start with you?
Okay, then I continue. Well, as I said, our advice is to book as possible or how to say this? As early as possible. Yeah, I'm sorry. The other thing is what we see is, and even this brings another layer of complexity into this. Years ago, the differentiator or the why are you choosing it was just, there was the price. The second was the flight time. And now there are more layers into this. I mean, now it's the CO2 thing. Now it's this sustainability. We heard about this in general. And we have a lot of clients asking us now for, this sustainable airline fuel. We as Cooni, or our mother company, DR in Germany, we have bought even some packages for customers in the last few months. It's a very new thing, The issue is, as a company, how can you get the reports from the sustainable airline fuel? Because if you buy it in Switzerland, for example, in Zurich, there will be definitely no SAF in the airplanes. So the only place is Frankfurt, where they can just put sustainable airline fuel in there. So it's really, new topics are really coming into display, right?
Right, absolutely. Thank you. Mark, let me continue with you.
Sure. So what we observe really that is changing in terms of the travel managers with their travel programs is that they are changing the way that they run the pre-ticketing approvals. So in the past, it was more common to see a configuration where the direct manager will approve the trip before it gets ticketed. And now we're seeing that they are assigning that to more high up executives with the organization, especially for international travel. So that causes some issues with the program, as you can imagine, because usually these individuals are very busy. Not all the time they have the time to be looking at their emails to be approving travel. But that's why we're noticing that they are doing we see that there are less people approving travel, but there are more high up executives. And obviously they've been, observing the buying patterns more and looking for ways that they can negotiate better, perhaps eliminate some of the suppliers from their travel program and concentrate more on one supplier to try to achieve a better discounts.
Right. That must be challenging in itself with expired fares and all that fun stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. More work on the agency side for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reshopping that the agents need to do. But.
Did Joanne continue with you?
Yeah, and I know travel managers, has to manage the high travel spends and how to manage it. So I think they would have to spend more time to work on budgets, work their budgets and see how they can manage the costs. And on the other hand, you talk about, negotiation with suppliers. Excuse me. I think with high prices, I think negotiation is not as straightforward. I think it's tougher today because you need to manage, again, the cost and the budget. And travel managers would likely have to increase their time spent on educating and, training travelers or get their buy-ins and share with them the objectives or, the goal of, how to manage costs in the first place and how all these changes is going to affect them or not affect them, and put certain programs in place to ensure that that the buy-ins are, are positive and healthy. Yeah.
Right. Great. Thank you very much. Now, I think, Andreas, you kind of you started talking about continuous pricing. Let's talk about that a little bit more. We talked about it in a couple of the sessions. We touched on NDC, we kind of touched on continuous pricing, but as evolution changes, the industry, aside from just changing behavior, this really is part of changing behavior because it's forcing change, right? So, Joanna, why don't we just continue with you, if you want to talk about how continuous pricing in NDC has impacted your market?
Singapore Airlines is one of the first airlines to introduce continuous pricing. So what it means is that it's beyond, or it's it's like dynamic pricing evolution. It's beyond dynamic pricing. So prices are changing constantly depending on the travel supply and demand. So how we manage it is that we really have to lay out to the travelers or the arrangers that the prices that they see today might not be the same tomorrow. So we make it really clear so that when they get their budget or their approvals, they have some buffer in place to curb that price change. I'm booking it in advance. Andrea said it. The price may change for the better, but we never know. But then again, continuous pricing from the trend we see today, the airfare prices hardly fall much. In fact, we see it consistently going up. And how we manage it is to encourage travelers to make a decision sooner so we could lock in the price and try to buy the ticket or get it ticketed soon as possible. So that's how we go. And following Singapore Airlines, the other airlines are introducing the same. That is also to manage revenue and inventory. So they come up with continuous pricing. We do not know what's next, but this is one of a big game changer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mark?
Sure, yeah, that brings a huge issue for us and the need of a lot of education with travelers, because obviously if I check a price for, an airfare from point A to point B right now, and maybe in an hour, if I check again, the price is gonna be completely different. So sometimes, it's positive for us, but most of the time they're gonna check somewhere else and they're gonna say that they found a cheaper fare, and they don't take into consideration those factors because they don't really understand the travel industry like we understand, right? So there's a need. We're trying to help the travel managers that work with us to educate their travelers on what that's going on and how they need to contact us or how they need to report those issues, and make sure that they are comparing apples to apples when they are, because sometimes something this little may become a huge depending on who that happened with, if it's an executive or something like that, and creates a lot of friction within the entire travel program, right? So education is key, and it's something that needs to be taken very, very important by the travel managers. We also see more need for these reshopping tools. I think that's super important, as both of my colleagues here listed, and there are more interest on those tools in Latin America. It's not so developed as it is here in the US and in Europe, but we're seeing, that appetite growing more. And in terms of NDC, I think in a way we're lucky in both markets, in Brazil and in Mexico also, because not NDC, but these direct APIs, they are nothing new to us. Like you take the Brazilian market as an example, the market is dominated by 3 airlines. And they kind of have the same market share, roughly a 30% each one of them, let's say. And 2 of them, they were born as low-cost airlines, so they were never on the GDS in Brazil. So the tools that we use for, online booking tool or our back office, they had to develop APIs with these airlines, from long time ago. So it's nothing new for us. Mexico is the same situation. Aeromexico dominates the market, and then you have 2 other players. But all these technologies, they had to adjust to that very soon. So far, I mean, for some clients that fly a lot with, an airline like a Copa or Avianca with something newer that perhaps the technologies are not adjusted yet, yeah, we may hear some friction here and there, but in general, it was nothing compared to what's going on here in the US now with American and United.
Yeah. Andres, do you want to add more? I know you brought it up recently.
Yeah. I mean, we touched the topic on the pre-approval system. So in Switzerland, we can see that companies are going away from this, because simply what we have discussed before, the price is changing always, and if you ask your boss for an approval, then maybe in the next hour or next day or 2 days, this price has been gone, right? So then there is a new price, and then you start the whole process again. So that makes no sense. And anyhow, the approval you will get at the end of the travel through the T&E expense management system anyhow, right? So Pre-trip approval it's not really a topic for us any longer in Switzerland. But yes, continuous pricing is. Swiss Airlines, they have introduced this on 15th of February this year, so it's not that old. And of course, together with the NDC content and the NDC problematic, I mean, we learned these days that NDC is not NDC. There is no standard. I mean, when I listened to this 10 years ago, the airline said there is now one unique global standard coming out, but it isn't. So each airline, they have their individual standard, they have their own APIs connected through us, and of course this gives us really some headaches because they have, well, I'm not this techie, but in the NDC world, they have different layers of, or steps of NDC. So you can do with airline A, you can do this. With airline B, you can do something else. So it's really very, very complex. And I have to ask always our head of operation when it comes, can I book this airline through NDC, yes or no? And this one, yes, and this maybe in 6 months. And so that's really confusing. And on top of this, we have all these low-cost carriers in Europe. Yeah, we mentioned this before, Eurowings, or we have in Switzerland, we have a huge hub from Geneva, which is EasyJet, for example. So we need to book EasyJet. Ryanair is another topic. So we have to integrate this as well. So we have the continuous pricing, we have the NDC, we have the low-cost carrier, and all this is changing every time. So it's really a challenge for us. But it is good because, I mean, I'm now since more or less 40 years in this industry, and since 20 years I always hear TMCs, they will die, TMCs, they will die. But we are still here, right? We are alive. And what I can see from my point of view is that the complexity is not getting less. It's getting more and more. And therefore, there will be a need for us to help all of you, even in the future.
That's right. Thank you so much. And we've always said that, new technology and new entrance into the market is a good thing, right? But it has to be at the right time for the right reasons and to help travel managers be able to run a well-managed program. And right now, with all of these changes with NDC and continuous pricing, it's still so early into it that it is ever changing. And it's going to take time for us to be able to gather that information because continuous pricing today, I don't know if everyone in the audience realizes, is that in the old EDIFACT environment where they have the alphabet soup, we used to call it, where you mix and match fares, that goes away in this environment. So as questions come up on fares, as you all eloquently stated, it's hard to show what actually occurred because the airline has decided to change the price offering to that shopper. So it's, as we move forward into this territory, it's going to be a lot of learning to be able to communicate, best practices. And it sounds like there's certain parts of the world that are more advanced with that than we are.
And for the travel managers, there is another complexity, especially in Europe, because the trend of, and it was mentioned, I guess, in one of the previous sessions, that the trend of having longer trips instead of having 2 or 3 short trips is still there. And then it's the combination with, we know this word pleasure, right? So, I mean, if my meeting ends on Friday, can I maybe stay Saturday and Sunday? This leads into complex questions in regards to taxes, value-added taxes in Germany as well, or in Switzerland and in Germany and in Europe, because there is an advantage, there is an advantage for the traveler. So do the traveler has to pay taxes for this, or the company? What is about the insurances? If you extended your trip or for the weekend, is it still insured? Is this considered as a business trip, or what is this actually? So there are thousands of questions now for the travel managers or for the procurement departments, what needs to be answered. And I mean, this is good to work hand in hand with the TMC then to solve all these issues.
Right. Absolutely. So I think I'm going to put you on the spot just for a moment. We didn't talk about this, but if there was one thing before we go into the Q&A part of the session, if there's one thing about your region that you would want this audience to know, what would that be? Joanne, I'll start with you.
I think Asia is quite dynamic because of the different cultures. Even though we are Asia, but different country holds different culture, and the travelers' expectation obviously will be very different as well. So I think for travelers to be able to manage a successful program is to understand the culture and provide training and education and involve us in the process so that we could take on questions and help them to understand if there's a policy update or there's certain nuances in that region or in that market. And I think it's still all about communicating to them and educating them on the whole program. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Mark?
I'll talk about the first thing that comes to my mind when you ask the question, which is about OBT selection in Latin America, because we've seen some good examples already and some bad examples sometimes when people are making the selection of the OBT. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's really about making sure that you understand and you have like a very, very clear what are the goals with your travel program and what are your needs, right, when you're selecting the OBT. Just to give an example to make like a more clear for you to visualize what I'm talking about. So let's say if you're a multinational company and you're give more freedom to your employees, you're not so much worried about the pre-ticketing approval and all of that. Perhaps Concur is going to work beautifully in the region. But if you are more worried about the pre-approvals, you want to make sure that everything flows the same flow with all the content, taking into considerations this so-called low-cost airlines that don't have the full functionalities on the GDS. Perhaps you want to work with a local tool. Just to give an example about that. But make sure you understand the limitations of each tool and you do a good match with the goals and the needs of your travel program.
That's great, thank you. And Andreas?
So I can actually say the same. For Europe, we have cultural differences. We have a lot of languages in Europe. And just to make it short, one size does not fit all. Yeah. So we need to have tailor-made programs for our corporate customers.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we're actually going great on time. We have the last 10 minutes for Q&A. Anyone have any questions for this impressive panel up here? Don't be shy. Going once, going twice? I know, right? All questions answered. It is a tough spot to fill when we're the last presenters. But to this panel, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to represent your regions. I've learned a ton spending this time with you, so thank you very much, and thank you to all.